No, I'm not worried at all. I rely on God, Allah.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We want to welcome all you beautiful viewers to the Life Haqq podcast. Today, again, another spectacular guest, a friend of the podcast, Ustadh Abdullah al Andalusi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Glad to be here, brother.
Yes, I'm glad to see you again. It seems like we're always brought together in khair, on the path of fi sabilillah. And today we have a wide assortment of delicacies in front of you. So these are, would we say these are Canadian delicacies or global? We have a global fare of different delicacies that we have placed at your feet like a king. You are literally a king at this point.
Like cheesy popcorn with toffee popcorn.
Yes.
What abomination is this?
Yes.
What? You have to keep them separate. This is.
It's a bid'ah hasana. It's a very good innovation, from what I'm told. But let's see here. We have the assortment is chocolate covered caramels, right? Is that correct, chef? Chocolate covered caramels. Yes. Okay. And these are almond M&Ms. Peanut M&Ms. You don't have a peanut allergy, do you? It's too late if you do.
We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see.
And then this is, are this caramel popcorn?
Yes.
But cheesy as well. It's got like...
It's got cheese in it as well?
Cheesy popcorn. And
We don't segregate here.
No, it has cheese and caramel mixed together.
This is an egalitarian world where cheesy and sweet can coexist together.
only in North America.
Okay. And then these are the famous sour Skittles.
Sour Skittles, yeah.
Sour
But
Skittles.
what you're lacking is the blue box Fruit Loops.
Oh, Fruit Loops. So
Yeah, that's the Fruit Loop story is one that's been attached to Edmonton, I believe. It's a legend, in fact.
So we have all the food groups covered here, right? In this assortment, and I think this is
all the healthy food groups. Yeah,
you should. We can actually advertise this as a new diet, right? For the busy duat. Right.
Yeah, for the busy duat that's tired of living and
the duat that's on the go, right? So, but alhamdulillah,
on the go to diabetes. Yeah.
Yes. So we had it's actually a late night kind of snack situation. You had a lecture just earlier today. You've now been to 2 different cities, correct?
This is Winnipeg and Edmonton.
Yes.
This is the second.
Oh, so this is the second stop for you. How you found your trip so far? Because we are bringing you this time. You're being brought in warmer weather conditions. How do you appreciate that?
Yeah, today was only minus 14, so
yeah.
I feel like sunbathing or something. This is sunbathing weather in Canada.
Yeah.
No, alhamdulillah, it's good. Although it's a bit surreal because we're in COVID restrictions. Although now it's being released or relaxed a bit. So
I hope I'm not triggering you. I'm not wearing a mask. We're not even 6 feet apart.
So I'm kind of like I've got triple vaccinated and
so
and
you're okay.
Swabbed and all kinds.
How was it traveling? You were okay traveling?
It was actually pretty much smooth sailing. Actually,
yes,
smooth sailing. I'm not complaining at all.
You didn't get randomly selected for extra testing or anything like that.
No. I usually get randomly selected for other things, but in terms of COVID testing, no.
Okay.
No,
but you do get randomly selected at the airport for extra, questioning or whatever. Did they do that for you?
Oh no! Only when you go to United States of America.
Okay.
Because United States of America is a welcoming place for visitors.
Yeah.
As everyone knows, but Canada and other places, no. They actually.
That's good.
They have a rather different policy from their neighbor to the south.
Yes. No, because in and of itself, obviously, in the era of COVID, it's very stressful traveling, and then on top of that, you have like all these COVID regulations and whatnot. So, but it's good to see you're here in person, because we did this online last year, because frankly speaking, the dawah needs to continue, right? We can't, we got to try and find ways and paths to get through all these different barriers, and they're all different tests for us. So alhamdulillah, it's good to see you back, because you're obviously one of like the mainstays for this program that we have for the United Islam Awareness Week. Now, what I want to ask you is just to kind of get things going, because we're going to go wherever the night takes us. So we're going to maybe talk about current events, contemporary things. We'll talk about serious things. We'll talk about, but you know what? I wanted to actually, because I know you are somebody really in tune with geopolitics, and you know, you take an interest in that, and you have some good contacts and good opinions. This whole situation now that's happening with Ukraine and Russia, what are the consequences for the Muslim community, right? Muslim nations, the Muslim community, because you see a lot of comments online, either, you know, people are saying, oh, supporting Ukraine, how can Russia do this? Other people are saying, hey, Muslims, you should just stay out of this. And then other people are saying, hey, look, there's Muslim Chechens fighting for Russia. We support. What is your take on all of this, and what is the smart move and play for the Muslim community?
Oh, so a light question then.
I just want to get going right away. Get into something very light and easy and non-controversial.
Okay, well, so a little bit about the origins of this conflict. So 2014, there was a kind of a type of revolution, you could say, in Ukraine. They have elections, and you see a smattering of parties are elected, including some parties that have what something might describe as very, very right-wing opinions.
In Ukraine.
In Ukraine.
Okay, and so this is where some of the Nazi rhetoric is coming from. Like, there's a lot of because both sides are accusing each other of being neo-Nazis, right?
Sure. Well, I mean, there was a minority of outspoken Ukrainians who had ultra-nationalist perspectives, and then there was a push for the Ukrainian parliament to pass through a law that would cease recognizing Russian as a minority language, and just cease recognizing it officially, which obviously alienated some of the Russian speakers in Donbass. And so possibly Putin saw this as an opportunity to interfere in Ukrainian affairs, arguing that he was going to be defending the Russian speakers from being alienated and being discriminated against, and then maybe kind of enticing them, or in essence getting people on the ground to be his mouthpiece, and call for independence of some territories which are Russian speaking. And this is a strategy that Russia has done also in Georgia as well. People often forget that Georgia was also invaded a bit by Russia to protect these Russian-speaking enclaves in Georgia. So for some reason, people's memories are quite short for that.
Yeah.
And also, Moldova also has a little sliver of its land, which again Russia has been working its kind of machinations to make it independent, even though it's not really recognized as such. So Russia's been doing that kind of tactic. Wherever Russian speakers are, it will try to use them as a pretext to intervene and extend its sphere.
This is different than the pretext with the war that they had with Chechnya, correct?
Yeah, this is different. It is different because Chechnya was considered to be still one of the federated states as part of the Russian Federation. And so Russia would not recognize their secession. And then while they have, let's say, a type of federated autonomy, as much as a federation could permit, Russia certainly wants to keep it in their sphere of influence. Some are arguing that Russia would like to see a return back to the type of defensible borders that the Soviet Union, as an entire land bloc, provided Russia. That's some of the theories, and that Russia always cites history, and Putin has always cited history to show that we've experienced a minimum of at least 4 major European invasions of Russia in the past, going all the way back to obviously the 2 world wars and then Napoleon Bonaparte and one from Sweden. So Putin's always talking about history a lot and saying that, well, because the territory is very flat lands, it's not defensible. You have to use a lot of tank divisions and again, there's no rocks to hide behind. There's no mountains to hide behind. There's no natural barriers. So Russia might feel to be, in a way, vulnerable. And some people have said that the geography of Russia has always determined its foreign policy and its domestic policy. So that's generally what occurred. Now, there's an added bit of spice to the mix, which is Putin has a long record of manipulation, manipulating domestic politics and trying to interfere in foreign politics. But his manipulation is is insidious, but also Kafkaesque. In Russia, he will get funded both pro-Putin organizations, pro-Russian government organizations, and even opposition organizations, so those who are opposing him or criticizing him. So much so, there's so many kind of funding of different organizations which seem to be at contrary odds, if you would, on appearance. But what this actually does is that it makes no one sure who's actually genuine and who's actually being a kind of a mouthpiece or a manipulation of Putin.
So it's kind of like a fake opposite or controlled opposition that he creates.
More like a controlled confusion.
Okay.
To the point that you become paranoid about everyone, that you don't organize with anyone, a real opposition, because you don't know who to trust. You don't know which one is. It just causes
paralysis, basically, of anything.
And it's highly effective. It's highly effective. So some people have speculated that perhaps the so-called neo-Nazis in Ukraine was also a Putin manipulation as well. But we're in the realm of obviously speculation here.
Yes.
But it's certainly not outside the remit.
But whatever Putin does, don't any of these world powers, aren't they doing the same type of tactics, or at least have the same type of objective, which is to retain, this type of power?
Yes, but
and manipulate other people.
Putin does it better.
Yeah.
Because, like United States of America, its usual approach is it will fund its allies and friends because there's a degree of oversight, with the exception of the black ops that CIA might do and things like this, but there's a degree a bit more of oversight. So they will usually fund friends and allies that they want to support, generally speaking. But to kind of be funding a whole bunch of different organizations, including anti-American organizations,
yes,
we don't hear so much about, or there's not much credible evidence about. That would be too much manipulated, and they view it as pointless anyway. But Putin,
well, I guess their methodology is different. Like their Game of Thrones essentially maybe has a different set of rules, whereas obviously Russia has, like Putin has developed this. But it just seems that all of these different major players on the world stage are also actively trying to manipulate one another's systems.
Of course, it's a question of tactics rather than differing strategies. Everyone has the same strategy to manipulate each other, to weaken the rivals, and the West would love to see a regime change in Russia, that someone that was more friendly, a type of return of Yeltsin, Boris Yeltsin perhaps, is what they would love to see. But on the flip side, Putin's most of his manipulation occurs domestically in Russia, which keeps his opposition paralyzed because no one knows which opposition amongst the opposition leaders and movements you can trust.
Yes.
And you're right, you have controlled opposition, that's true. But it's like, as a Muslim, let's say you were to hear of, let's say there's a Muslim organization, they seem to be speaking the truth about things and explaining Islam unapologetically. But what if you then discover that this organization has been funded by the US government?
Yeah.
Right? You say, well, wait a second, I can't trust them anymore.
Yeah.
Even though they haven't said anything that's bad, and you actually would agree with some of the things they might have said, but if you knew they were being funded by the US government, then any other organization that says something similar to them, you'll start suspecting, and pretty soon you won't know who to trust, and then the suspicions will.
But that they actually do that. United States government. There's an academic paper that I have where they go and actually study the different programs that United States government has developed to support different Islamic organizations that achieve their objective. And a lot of it is also linked with the research with the RAND Corporation.
It's the RAND Corporation,
right?
Yeah.
So then how they...
Civil Democratic Islam, that one, yeah.
Exactly, right? And then, if you look into the details of that report, for example, they, classify, your traditionalists, your fundamentalist Muslims, your modernists and whatnot. And then they go into the details, okay, we want to pit the fundamentalists against the traditionalists, and when we have an option of if this is this scenario, this is the best options. If it's like a modernist and a traditionalist, these are the best options. So they kind of go through these different essentially algorithms, and then they fund those those specific organizations, or they'll provide grants, even to the extent there's Muslim hip hop groups. And they get funding, you know what I mean? So it's interesting, how you mentioned what Putin does, but it just brought to my mind that academic paper where they actually study, how the extent that they do that, they study the effect that their programs or their interactions have on themselves. So, for example, they have a division that is contracted to deal with Muslims. Oftentimes, like we saw with the Gulf War, for example, the first Gulf War especially, and they learned from this that many of their soldiers became Muslim. You know what I mean? Because of the interaction and because they were in Saudi for a while, a lot of the bases, the attacks that came from Saudi, many people became Muslim. So they actually started studying, okay, we have this program or we have this agenda with Muslims. So what is the effect of that interaction of our soldiers, our whatever NGO that we've set up or whatever? What is the effect on those people? Because they have obviously an objective, but you can get the reverse because, if they sympathize or if they, come to accept some of those principles and say, hey, this is not as bad as what we thought it would be, it has that reverse. So they actually study that effect and how to counteract that. So this is, what you're telling me, subhanAllah, I think this may be more widespread. Obviously we see this with Putin, but I think we've seen this, obviously, the Muslim community has been affected by this. I think also they've done, a lot of the dawah organizations and whatnot in some Muslim countries, right? Say a lot of movements, they get manipulated and people are I don't want to be part of anything because is this from the government? Is this a fake thing? Is this real? Or are these, you know what I mean? So again, it's that paranoia which causes paralysis. I think it's he's probably perfected it and done it very well, but perhaps we see this even more widespread, especially I think being used against Muslims.
Yeah, it's in a way, yes, but there's a very slight difference between them. So Putin's kind of strategy, former KGB as he is, their tactic is to paralyze political opposition and kind of keep his regime stable and strong and enjoy public support. That's more concerning people's opinions and sentiments concerning the government and so on. But what the Rand Corporation paper, I believe you're referring to, had a more grandiose objective, which is to actually change the Muslim mindset about Islam itself, which is a few degrees above.
Oh yeah, it's the next level.
Putin's more kind of short-term strategy and much less. The scope is much more.
Does Putin have an ideology that he's trying to like create, or that's driving him, or is it just him? It's like, I want my regime, or is there an ideology that he is? It's
just your was it standard garden variety dictator. But the Russian constitution, of course, is purportedly secular liberal, a version of secular liberalism. It's not it's certainly not Marxist anymore. But Putin wants to retain office, and of course, the constitution doesn't allow his office to be re-elected more than twice, and then he used a colleague of his to kind of fill in as a puppet, and then he gets elected again afterwards to continue another two terms.
But he can't live forever. So is he gonna is it gonna be a monarchy? Like, is he trying to establish some type of succession after? Is that in the works? Like, is there any signs of that? Because
I mean, I don't think even Putin would perhaps be so brazen to set up a dynasty. But I think, as far as he's alive, he wants to be in power in Russia. And sure, like he's motivated by your bulk standard nationalist sentiments. He wants Russia to be powerful and strong and so on and so forth. It's not ideological so far. It's just your standard garden variety autocrat.
Yeah.
For want of a better word. And so, there's nothing kind of too mysterious. But Russian history has always had a preference for autocrats or monarchs, basically, from Ivan the Terrible. And
could you see that for the world, though, too?
I mean, not quite, because certain places like Venice, was a city-state that had a kind of elected oligarchy rule, and that suited them. Others had constitutional monarchies, or monarchies controlled by, you could say, tradition forming the constitution, so the power of the king limited by tradition. But Russia has had full-blown autocrats. The difference being between an autocrat and a king is the king is limited by the traditions that he is in power to preserve and continue. And so he could always potentially be removed from power by the Council of Nobles or whoever is the Ahl al-Hal wal-Aqd, who kind of are the kingmakers. Whereas a dictator or an autocrat has absolute power in its, you could say, maximal sense that any individual can have. They can define whatever the culture is of the country at will. And there's nothing to stop them from their diktat becoming law. And even though Russia has a constitution, it has laws, but it is a de jure democracy, but it's a de facto autocracy. You see, and it's just like Russians have usually looked up to strong autocratic leaders, or at least obeyed them anyway.
So you're saying 2014, there was this tension, and Putin was trying to manipulate the situation, utilize this sentiment where Russian-speaking people their rights were being taken away, or they were somehow being oppressed. So,
or some might say he actually helped engineer that circumstance to give him a pretext, but Allahu Alam, we don't know.
But then, so then what ends up becoming the result of that? Because obviously something resolved so that we have this inflamed situation now?
Well, Russia uses the pretext of intervention. It says that it's simply helping to arm the independence movements in southeast Ukraine. But really, people suspect it's just the Russian army coming in and pretending to be Russian-speaking Ukrainians. That you consider this a civil war begins, but that civil war kind of it simmers and reaches a type of fixed stalemate. And Russia wanted to initially just saber rattle and scare Ukraine into giving concessions, maybe autonomy to those regions, which would then de facto just be, extensions of Russia. And Russia already took the Crimea, just annexed them unilaterally, and Russia just thought that they could get these concessions and take, because there's this kind of two areas in southeast Ukraine, and the so-called rebels control 1/3 of those areas, but they claim the whole area. They claim the whole area. So it was thought that Russia was going to basically pressure Ukraine to basically cede those areas to the rebels, or give them at least autonomy of some kind. But then really they'd come under the sphere of influence of Russia because they're on the border, and they're going to be fully dependent on Russia. But when Ukraine wasn't backing down on this, and despite the threats, despite the saber rattling, and then of course it escalated when his saber rattling, he uses it in domestic media outlets to just get the Russian people behind him. But then as the West and others start kind of counter-threatening Putin and so on, it gets to the point where it becomes hard for him to back down. Many political analysts think that he'd actually never intended that it would end up with an invasion of Ukraine. He hoped that Ukraine would have just backed down, but because he's been, let's say, you're
talking about now or still 2014?
I'm talking about now.
Okay,
about now recently, okay. And then but because he's been talking a good game, and responding to the comments of the Ukrainian leadership, as well as the European powers in the United States of America, he would lose a lot of face to actually really just back down now.
What about people speculating that it was the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO and then having NATO right at their doorstep was one of the precipitating factors for this latest invasion?
Some have said that, but why was NATO dithering then? NATO was dithering on actually incorporating Ukraine in. If that was going to occur, it was going to probably occur sooner rather than later, but it hasn't yet.
Yeah. And if we see one of the results, like Biden did give a speech where he never said, "Oh, we're going to send any military. We're not going to be involved directly with any type of military support of Ukraine besides just providing them weapons." But he just said, "But if he steps one foot onto any NATO country, we're going to attack." Right?
Yeah.
So that seems to be a very hard line. Like, if you're part of a NATO country, you're going to get attacked. So I don't know if this was. It seems like it is a pretty big reason for them, but I don't know if this is if this is just being used as the latest reason to justify that invasion or from within his own country or what. But one thing that does give some credence to that is the statement of Biden, because he specifically said, like when he was asked, "Are you going to send troops to help support Ukraine?" He said no. He's like, but then he followed up by saying to try to get save face himself and show that we're still brave and you don't mess with us. If he steps one foot on any single NATO country, we're gonna hit him with the full force.
Yeah, and Russia wouldn't do it anyway either. It's it's not like the Soviet Union times where the Russian army actually outnumbered the combined forces of Europe. Now the European armies in Europe actually outnumber the Russian army in tanks and soldiers. So
do you see
it could win
China? Do
conventionally.
you see China taking advantage of this and getting with the Taiwan situation?
Well, it's a kind of watch and wait for China. Already, China has been testing Taiwan defenses with fighter flyovers and things like this, testing their air defenses. Not necessarily enticing them to shoot, but trying to constantly keep their air defenses in a state of readiness and seeing how they react to that. Because it's within military jet range, Taiwan, and so they're testing the waters, and as the strategic balance changes more and more as China gets stronger and stronger, and the United States of America, their military has obviously decreased over many decades. They might be overextended, and therefore there might be a time where China might exploit that to take back Taiwan. It's never backed down from claiming Taiwan as an integral part of China, and so I think everyone knows it could be a matter of time before China does put it, but it's waiting to see what it thinks about the American response.
So back to the original question, this conflict now between
what's
Ukraine and
Muslims,
Israel.
basically,
Yeah. Like, so as a Muslim community, because you see obviously Muslims, like, anyone who's taking this maturely. Obviously you have anybody who like they joke about this and they talk about, all sorts of connected to all sorts of other things. But as Muslims, we know there's Muslims in Ukraine. There's Muslims
in the Crimea.
In the Crimea, and there's Muslims in fighting with the Russians. So you have two groups of Muslims within these non-Muslim armies, essentially. What should the Muslim perspective be on this?
Well, I would see from the Quran, our perspective, generally speaking, is what is to be gained by fighting in the name of a war that really has nothing to do with Islamic interests. They're both fighting for nationalism, and as Muslims, we know there's a hadith by the Rasulullah where, to paraphrase, anyone who calls for nationalism, anyone who fights for nationalism, anyone who dies for nationalism is not one of us, not one of the Muslims. So to paraphrase the narration, and so any Muslim that goes out to fight and risk their neck just for the sake of nationalism, it could be risking a lot indeed, not just in this life, but in the next. And so there's no reason now.
Because couldn't they also be used as pawns, as they often do? You know what I mean?
Oh, Muslims are regularly used as pawns,
right? Like so I don't know if you saw that clip of somebody from the UK. Like, I don't know if he was a commentator or what. It was going around on Twitter where he was saying, "Oh, we need to send mujahideen to help the Ukrainian people." As some white guy, who do you know what I'm referring to?
I haven't heard of that. But would they say that? Would they say the same about the Syrians who've been faced the bombardment of Russian forces in Syria?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, of course not.
Of course not, because they would be accused of being this is terrorism.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Because
but when
they're praising people.
Interests, it's not terrorism. I mean, you saw the recent story of this Ukrainian kind of military engineer who blew himself up.
Yes.
And to destroy a bridge to prevent the Russians from crossing it. Said as a hero.
Yeah, suicide bomber.
Yeah, suicide bomber. Said as a hero.
Yes.
Whereas if a Muslim did that, of course, for a different cause, they accuse him of being a terrorist. Like, I have no doubt that the Russian media will describe once they, if Russia is able to kind of, let's say, take Kiev and control the country, there'll be a guerrilla warfare that will begin, funded by the West, undoubtedly. And Russia will say these are insurgent terrorists. Right? And the West will say these are brave resistance fighters. Same narrative again and again and again. But this case, because it's in the West's interest to support Ukraine, they will show, oh, look how the people of Ukraine are suffering. Meanwhile, how many Afghans and Iraqis suffered much worse damage. And currently in Yemen, the American allies, Saudi's bombardment and destruction of Yemen goes unremarked.
Surely you've heard some of the controversial commentating by mainstream news outlets in regards to this, right? The one CBS reporter saying, he's shocked to see this happening in such a civilized society with blonde hair, blue eyes. You know what I mean? Like, it's incredible how open they are about describing these people as like, this could be like one of us, like blonde hair, blue eyed, people who are civilized, and so it's and the way that they're talking, like as if it's been only days, right, for them to be involved in this conflict, and they're almost talking about them as being these great resistance fighters. Where Afghanistan, obviously, like the British Empire, the Russian Empire, the American Empire, right? The graveyard of empires is there, right? But the double standard, it's so stark, like it's so open, and I think it was just another clip that I saw recently with Condoleezza Rice. I don't know what, like they're not embarrassed to bring these people and ask them questions. Do you think somebody to attack a sovereign nation, to the effect, like, do you think this is a criminal act, something to that effect? And she's like, of course, you cannot attack a sovereign. I'm like, is this like a comedy show? Like, is this literally like, is this like, you cannot make a parody of this? Well,
I've hoped that through all this that Muslims will realize something that they should have realized long ago, which is, unfortunately, the world is not governed or ruled by principles as much as the UN would like to claim it is, or under the international law. What we see is always in international affairs, might has always been the determinant of right. What I would advise Muslims to take note from this is, I think, two things. One of them is that if Muslims are going to, if they're going to require the world to value Muslim blood and not to shed it and not to oppress Muslims, then Muslims are going to have to consider valuing their blood first and having a state that unites us, that values Muslim blood, puts Muslim blood as a inviolable interest, that it will move heavens and earth to defend and protect. Which, and we know from the Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, it's described that the Imam is a shield behind which the Ummah fight and protect itself. If we choose to not heed the words of the Prophet, of the Creator of the universe, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, then why are we surprised when our enemies just attack us like guests at a dinner table so freely, so openly, even inviting each other to do so? And secondly is that how can we expect anyone around the world to value Muslim blood if we don't value our own blood?
That's a very good point.
And that's what re-establishing the Khilafah, which all the classical scholars have said is an obligation. It's just a non-negotiable obligation. There's ijma across all schools of thought on this. So much so that the first splinter sects in the time of just after the Sahabas, even in the time of the Sahabas, were the Khawarij and then a bit the Shia, whose main disagreement was who should be a caliph and what makes a valid caliph. That's how it wasn't on do we need a khilafah or is it important? No, it was who meets the criteria to be the leader. That's how important it was, because Muslims have to have a state that puts Islam and Muslim interests first. Which Muslim country ever cares about Muslim interests?
You know, the one unfortunate fact or unfortunate possible circumstances that can arise when we look at Islamic history is that anytime you had like an establishment of an empire like that, forming that the coalition to create that Khalifa or that dynasty, you know, say for example the Ayyubid, for example, it seemed like it needed to have a lot of civil war. You know, like you need to conglomerate, you know, to bring that, you know, power together, because with, for example, the current modern states, right? Say like tomorrow, someone in Pakistan's this Khalifa. Okay, we're doing Khalifa. For them to really do that, they're going to have to fight all these Muslim countries, unless they all say yes. Okay, we're going to. You understand what I'm saying? But the way that nationalism and these modern states are set up, it seems like it's such a far distant possibility. Like it seems so out of reach. And then when you say, okay, what would be perhaps the way that things would come about? It seems like it would be super tumultuous. Like the way that you would have to coalesce power and consolidate portions of the ummah together. You know, like for example, you know, Salah ad-Din, he ended up fighting Muslims more than he fought the Crusaders. You know,
yes and no. So firstly, what we see is that when people see about wars in the Muslim world in the medieval times, we imagine these are like World War I wars where there's complete destruction of cities wiped off, you know, scorched earth and things like this. But what actually happened when the average Muslim civilian would see two emirs of two rival cities even fighting each other, and as far as they were concerned, it's like two gangs going to war, and they're just bystanders to it, because whoever wins is going to be the emir, and it's going to be Muslim, and the Islamic law is still being applied. So as far as they're concerned, it's irrelevant who is the leader. So the emir would just have his soldiers. But you know,
the movements that did work, that we would say is good and based on Quran and Sunnah, a lot of them actually did bring a reformation. Like they were fighting, like the laws weren't like, they had maybe, you know what I mean? Like the Murabitun, for example.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And even Salah ad-Din when he came, and the Reformation with the Shia. So like, it's not, I would say it went hand in hand in that Reformation, I would say, you know?
Well, I mean, look, the issue is that the Abbasid Khilafah was still existent at the time of Salah ad-Din.
Yes.
He gave bay'ah to the Abbasid Khalifa. But the Abbasid Khalifa had been reduced to direct control. It had managed to re-establish having direct control over the land, not just a figurehead anymore. But it was still limited to an area around in Iraq.
Yes.
But the Fatimids had always been a traditional enemy of the Abbasid Caliphate. But what you saw is that the Fatimids were having issues, domestic problems and issues. They invited Salah ad-Din Ayyubi to come and be a defender of the Fatimid state, and he came, and then he just did a coup and took it over. It was too weakened, and then he united the resources of Egypt and what he'd conquered in Syria. I don't think why he fought many Muslim wayward emirs to unite them. It didn't involve wholesale destructions of towns or cities.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Like because of course, if you would treat the Crusaders, we know he's so famous for treating them with mercy. You know, Muslims are going to have even a greater concession, and he would do that for them. But like, I'm just saying, like, not necessarily like with those perceptions that any infighting would, because this is a little bit controversial, right? Like when we're saying that if we look at history, the way that they consolidated power, there was a lot of internal within the Muslim community. And the most recent example of like that always gets brought up is like of these extremist groups. So we don't want to equate it to the same thing, right? We don't want to equate it like, to these fringe and extremist groups. But it just seems like if you were going to have a pan-Islamic type of coalition, there's either two scenarios. One scenario is that you have these modern states be able to come together and give bay'ah, like either elect from amongst themselves or to one state that rises above and give bay'ah to that, Or you have one state or one region exert some type of effort and campaign to consolidate power. That's what it seems like. Those are the two most likely paths. What are your thoughts in regards to that? Because one of them is a more dream scenario. The other one's like not so dreamy, but maybe a little bit more realistic.
Well, what you see is that, how would the first country become transformed into a Khilafah state? There would obviously be Muslim campaigning in that state, but would it only be in one state that Muslims will be campaigning for this? It would be multiple states. Maybe that one state would reach it first, perhaps, would be the case.
The reason why I say this in modern history, Afghanistan came very close because of so many foreign Muslims and people coming together, and after they defeated the Russians, there was that sentiment like, hey, pan-Islamic ideas can come back, and look at us, we're from all over the world, we defeated the Russians, you know what I mean? So from that template, we saw, and then when they went, afterwards, obviously many of the same people went off and did that in Chechnya for a while. Mm-hmm. So that's where you could see that when you have people having at least the opportunity to come together and say, and this doesn't necessarily have to be for war, right? Like if you had a peaceful Muslim country, and a lot of people thought of Malaysia about that, by the way, in the 90s. There was a lot of thought, like, amongst Muslims and a lot of rhetoric, hey, we should go to Malaysia. This is a good place, like, for us to reestablish, some type of Muslim, proper Muslim country, like, with almost like maybe like a Khilafah identity, like in the late 90s, and then there was the economic crash and whatnot. But you understand what I'm saying? So if a country is open to accept different Muslims, then that's where you could see that coming about.
There's perhaps a third scenario, which is you start changing each of the countries through mass campaigning. At least a bunch of key ones, turning them into Islamic emirates. Where the emir is just an emir, but the system is Islamic, the sentiments are Islamic, and the emir could possibly be argued to take a provisional role and have a provisional authority pending the caliph's ascension to power, and then when you get enough key Islamic emirates in the Muslim world. Then they could have a conference and decide a system of electing a khalifa, and then they would become all governorates of the khilafah. And then once you have enough, at least a critical mass of Muslim Islamic emirates, which then incorporate themselves into a khilafah, the countries that are not part of that, the people the Muslims in them would be reticent to oppose that once they're seeing that the ball is starting to roll in that direction. And so even those countries that whose regimes might be corrupt and would want to and are backed by the West and want to resist, their soldiers might not fight for them. They might give up. And if there's anything that I've noticed from looking at history of Muslims motivated by nationalism and Muslims motivated by Islamic sentiments, is that Muslim soldiers motivated by Islamic sentiments regularly outperform by many,
Of course,
by multiples,
of course,
by factors of or at least 2 or 3,
Yeah.
those motivated by nationalism. I mean, just look at the Saudi army in Yemen. Despite having advanced weaponry and equipment, it's pretty much in a stalemate in Yemen against Houthi fighters are not really a modern army by any standard. And yet, the Saudis
I think
can't
people
really make
fail
any
to
headway.
people fail to realize that unless when you have a bigger power, like when there is a massive power and difference, if that entity that has the greater power, if they aren't able to actually win within a short period of time, it becomes very difficult. It becomes very, very difficult. Like unless they do it in a very, very short period of time, then it becomes drawn out, and you can't actually, unless you colonize that area, like you physically start living there and you're gonna be part of the population, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. They're always kicked out. The only reason I say that, not because in a fatalistic way to say, hey, we gotta end up fighting each other and this is how it's gonna happen, but that's the only historical template that I see. You know what I mean? If that coalescing of especially when you have it fractured so much, right? We've had it where you've had different emirates of powers and whatnot, and unless you have the other scenario that has sometimes brought people together, is that when you have this overwhelming outside force that just forces people to coalesce together, to unite together, right? So you have that overwhelming external thing, hey, if we don't unite, we're gonna die. This is gonna be game over. No one's gonna be left, right? So,
Yeah. Well, I think it takes a combination of the threats posed by Israel, Russia, and India, for ultimately Muslims to get their act together, because India has 200 million Muslims, and if the Hindutva were able to get to a point where they were going to kick out or just massacre Muslims, it would be a genocide greater than any we've seen in modern history.
and people are saying that we're at the precipice of that.
Yep. And of course, Russia is also eyeing up Kazakhstan, a ostensibly Muslim country, to again reincorporate and make and get its more defensive borders. It would retake the Central Asian stans, as they say, as the Soviet Union had those incorporated in them as Soviet republics back in the day. So there's that, and then of course, not just how India treats Muslims in India, but also India's been spying Azad Kashmir. There's always a question of they wanted to reunify Kashmir for themselves. And the Pakistani military, yes, it does have tactical nukes to deal with mass numbers of Indian army, but still it's facing an army that is much larger than itself, than the numbers that it can bring to bear. And as the Indian economy gets stronger and stronger, obviously their army will be more and more funded, and it will pose a greater threat, such that Pakistan can't contain it or prevent it from doing what it wills, perhaps on its own territory, without help from the rest of the Muslim Ummah. So I think Muslims are going to be, in a way, until we snap out of our stupor, we're going to face ever encroaching and ever more brazen attacks on Muslims and from outside the Muslim world coming into us.
Which country do you see as the best hope for reviving pan-Islamic unity?
Well, it's not a case of one country. I see. See, the thing is, whenever you mention a country, people always say, "Oh, but look how bad they are in this country," or "Look how secular they are in this country," and it's always this glass half empty. But they don't see.
Yeah.
Many Muslims, unfortunately, don't see the potential for how something can be turned around.
Yes,
For the best. They just see
because many Muslims, they look at, for example, the two countries right now that Muslims have a little bit of hope for because of the rhetoric of their leaders is Turkey and Pakistan. And they both have like different things that work for them and different things that work against them, right? So, I was recently talking, to some, du'at and scholars and, people familiar with Pakistan. And they say one thing that Pakistan has that many other countries don't have is the ulama there, the scholars there, have a lot more freedom and a lot more power. And it's hard to really actually, even if you don't like somebody, even the army cannot, if that scholar of like that certain masjid they're following has strong enough, they have the numbers and whatnot, they know it's too hard. It's not worth it, right? And then you look at Turkey, like they've made some, compared to just a decade, 2 decades ago, or especially if you compare it to like 100 years ago, and Kemalism and what they tried to do to completely sanitize any real substance of Islam within the country. For that, to be over, just reversed over time, and to even have that strong presence of Islamic identity. So people look at Turkey as as a sign of hope as well, right? And both of them have also called, like both leaders have also called for some type of a pan-Islamic organization to a certain degree, right?
It's to a certain degree, but like I mean, what we'd have to look at is not necessarily just those which are close, not close, but like closer to realizing Islamic Emirates, but countries that are actually strategically strong. You have to collect all the strong ones, and then you can reconstitute the Khilafah, because the remaining countries will be very weak, and once the strong ones kind of
so who would you say are the strong ones?
Also it would be Egypt as a strategic strong power in that region.
Yeah. So close yet so far with Egypt, right?
Yeah, but things can turn around pretty quickly. Muslims, I think one of the main things that we suffer from, unfortunately, in my experience, is a lack of imagination of the possibilities. It's always, oh, brother, do you know how secular Turkey is? Oh, brother, do you know how backward this country is?
You know what? Like when have you been to Turkey?
No,
okay.
Not yet.
So if inshallah, we'll go together. Inshallah, we'll make a trip. If you go to Turkey, and if you know the history of Turkey, and you know what Kemalism did, I actually look at the opposite. I'm like, man, I can't believe they brought Islam back to that extent. When you had the adhan outlawed, when you had imamas, you had to have like only a certain people who were given a religious license, like you're an imam of like, you're able to teach at one of their schools, can wear an imama in public. No one else is allowed to wear an imama in public. When you were banning the the hijab, teaching Quran, all of these different things, and then I go and I see the most secular, like modern liberal neighborhood. It has a small masjid. Everywhere around there is it's like a very expensive like neighborhood. And you hear 5 times a day adhan on loudspeaker being blasted, and then on Friday on Jum'ah they have like ayat, like they have Quran recitation that people hear. You know what I mean? And when you go to the masajid, packed always. 5 daily prayers, packed, right? I'm like, even though I walk down the street of Istanbul and I see like these secular guys walking around with tattoos and there's restaurants serving alcohol, I'm like, compared to what they had to go through, and especially if you're familiar what they had to go through for the past few decades, like any type of Islam revivalists, they would come and the army would depose them. Like, will they just take back power anytime they said, okay, these guys are becoming a little bit too religious, right? And for them to now, when the last coup came and they were able to maintain the power, I was like, this is a phenomenal accomplishment. In that period of time, after all the effort that was put in through Kemalism and external support and and whatnot to reshape that, because as you know, Europeans' eyes are always on there, right, on Turkey, and they put an incredible amount of effort, right? And there's at one point where Turkey was bending, and then to a certain degree, they still do, bending over backwards to be part of this European Union, right? But in recent history, like for example, one of my shuyukh was invited to like an international conference about like moon sighting and these different fiqh issues. One of my shuyukh is PhD in Usul al-Fiqh. So he talked to me about this, and he said this was actually a good initiative. Like, they didn't like try to screen people; they just tried to bring any qualified ulama there. And for some country just to do that, fund everyone to come, pay for their tickets, pay for their hotel, and all these ulama just are able to interact with one another and discuss, and even just the power of ideas that could come out of there. It's a good thing, right? It's a good, and you would have never thought this, a few decades ago, right? So if you know the history, I think when people say, "Oh, look at all the bad stuff," I think sometimes they don't look at the whole scenario and the whole situation in a complete way. So like even in Pakistan, like if you were to say like just even 10 years ago that there would be a possibility of like weeding out, cleaning corruption. So there's no way. There's not going to be any changes, right? Like you could not go. You could like literally, and it's still dangerous, but people were afraid to go to Karachi, for example. Like you go to Karachi, you're going to get robbed. Don't show a phone when you're out. Like, and I did like in 2000 or early 2000s. I went there, and the day that I went to I was picked up at the airport. My uncle told me the day before he was robbed. Right? Like it's crazy, but people are talking more of justice. There's more Islamic stuff being spoken about. Like I saw myself the evolution of people coming back to the deen within Pakistan. So I appreciate that. I'm like, okay, look at this. They said there was no hope for Pakistan to come out of corruption, right? But now you see, okay, hey, it is a possibility, and there could be massive changes in a short period of time. There's a joke that said that. On the countries that have the most bribe list, Pakistan was number 2, so they paid the bribe to get into, they bribed the list to get to number 1, right? So it was like, all this, but then I think last year it was like, one of the greatest stock markets, the Pakistani stock market had one of the greatest increases and things like that. So I think when people say that, they don't appreciate the modern historical context, right? Because we know that there was a lot of trauma with colonialism and a lot of things that happened in the aftermath of that, and so that process takes time, right? And I remember asking one of my shuyukh actually that you have all these movements. There's a lot of these Islamic movements. They come up, and it seems like for a short period of time they accomplish all these great things, and then they stop. They just plateau or they fail. And so he said you shouldn't look at it in that perspective. All of these different things, they move up, and wherever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has destined them to stop, they stop, but then it's like a step. And then the next one has to come to carry it. And then it's a step, and the next one has to carry it, right? But as long as you don't look at it as a failure, but it's a step, okay, who's going to take this and take it, further up, right? So I agree with you. I think people, they don't look at it in a complete, way, and sometimes your apathy or your fatalism can skew the way you look at, some of these events, how they unfold,
Yeah. So I think that it's very feasible. Muslims just have to believe it's feasible. There's this really strange irony in any political change. It starts with the belief in the possibility, and then that eventually becomes reality. But Muslims have to believe that they can do it, and that with enough patience and perseverance, but also with hikmah, they can achieve it. And it doesn't require like pulling a rabbit out of the hat. That's a form of magic, but simply going and doing the da'wah in the Muslim world. So explaining to Muslims the basis for their aqidah, giving them yaqeen in that, because then they'll be willing to actually, when they know for certain, absolute certainty that they can acquire Jannah by devoting themselves, by sacrificing their time and their efforts, even though they might face being arrested and imprisoned and things like this, then they'll do so. But fear shows that fear denies faith, right? Fear shows that there's a weakness in their understanding, because they think, oh, maybe I'm going to just be giving up my life for no reason, and there's no reward for me in the hereafter, and there's no whatever. There's that little grain of doubt that makes them weak. But then giving them an aim, a direction. What does a state would look? What does it look like? How does the economic system run? How would it actually practically solve these problems? How do you set up a banking system not based on interest? And how would we implement that in the current world environment? Once you give these details to the people, you teach, here's how it would look like, here's how feasible it would be, here's how within our grasp. Once they know what to aim for and they are motivated to do it, the rest takes care of itself. As the Quran says, Allah does not change the state of a people until they change within themselves. For some reason, many Muslims used to use that verse to say, so if Muslims were praying more, then Allah would change our state. Well, Saudi Arabia, people the vast majority of the population pray, and no one could argue that. They say, they don't know how to pray. They clearly do. That doesn't change their state. Now it's going to the worse, right? It's going to the worse. Change what's within yourself. It doesn't refer to changing your organs. So what's left? If it's not, the verse didn't say for those who change their actions. No, it's not about changing your organs. So what else is inside you that you can change? It's your ideas and your understandings. And yesterday, this question came up about what is the practical method for establishing Khilafah and so on and so forth. And I related something which most Muslims probably didn't realize, which is. So last year I gave a course on Palestine advocacy, and also debated a Zionist as well, well-known YouTube Zionist, Speaker's Corner and so on and so forth, engages Muslims. And so I've been covering the Palestine matter for 18, 19 years now.
MashaAllah.
And one of the things that I found fascinating was that in many ways, Jews were where Muslims are now, with the exception that they didn't have any states that were Jewish majority before they set up Israel, before they managed to reestablish their state in Palestine. And they at the beginning, people think that it was religious Jews that brought about the state of Israel at the beginning. No, it was the opposite. It was the atheists and socialist Jews that actually were the first ones who started, and liberal Jews who started to argue for it first. And they argued for it pragmatically. They said, look, everywhere in the world that Jews are, they are being persecuted, they're being disrespected, because we don't have a state that would require us to be accepted in the kind of the rankings of the world as a people that have a state that represent them, because it was an age of nationalism, and so they had no nation state that represents them. So their argument wasn't about let's reclaim our old birthright. No, that wasn't the main argument. The argument was Jews are being persecuted around the world. No one will respect us until we have a state on the world stage that will make people will demand that respect. Right, like every other nation has a state. Well, most nations have a state. We will not be respected until we have a state too. That was their main argument. So Friedrich Herzl wrote the book The Jewish State, and this was the argument he was making in that. And he didn't care whether the state was in Argentina or was in Palestine, right? And then they said, well, what do we do? And besides, most Jews were were thinking it's pie in the sky. Like make a state for us. How are you going to do that? Where? What's going on? They were very much skeptical about it, and simply what he did was he in essence he created a congress, the Zionist Congress. It wasn't that well attended. Not that many Jews from different organizations were there. You would think it was going to be like a damp squib, just not going to go anywhere. But what he does is he starts to send delegations to different countries, asking European powers, would you back our move? He goes to Sultan Abdul Hamid II, the Ottoman Caliph. He says, we'll give you all this money if you give us Palestine. What people didn't realize is he actually didn't have any money. What he was hoping was he would go to Sultan Abdul Hamid, offer him the money. He would say yes. Then he would go to find as many rich backers as he could, people who didn't think that you could have such a state, and say, look, here's a price tag. Isn't it practical now?
Yeah.
So just raise the money and we can then buy it, buy the land.
But didn't he, weren't people, you had some very phenomenally rich Jews though that were helping this project, right? Like the Rothschilds.
No, not at the beginning.
Not at the beginning, but as that movement, gained momentum, right?
Well, again, not so. Getting funding out the Rothschilds was like getting blood out of a stone back then. In typical fashion, why is it so familiar to me? Because I've seen such situations with many organizations who say that they try to approach rich people to fund their dawah, what have you, and it's like very hard to get that investment. I've heard many people complain to me about this, and it sounded so reminiscent. I was like, wow, this is so reminiscent. The Rothschilds weren't actually giving any money, even when Theodor Herzl was saying, look, he met up with them, and he got rebuffed. Like, no, they think it was pie in the sky. But what I found was fascinating was that many of these Zionist organizations, they thought, well, look, we don't know about getting a state or not, but let's just relocate Jews to Palestine, even under Ottoman control, buy farms, buy land, and send them there because there's pogroms and there's persecution. So we'll just send them there and just see what happens, right? It's like let's we'll just send them there. We have no plan, all right? Let's just see what happens, right? And they start building on that. And even then, that wasn't Theodor Herzl doing that, by the way. That was just, it was about just relocating, bringing Jews back to, as they say, to Palestine. But again, they had no idea. Most of them didn't even think about having a state. They just thought, wouldn't it be nice for Jews to come back to Palestine in greater numbers and avoid persecution in Russia and in Hungary and places like that? So,
do you know about the figure Aaron Aronson? The agronomist who worked for the Ottoman Empire. His story is fascinating. We actually did a series on modern history, and it's a very interesting role he played in the establishment of Israel and conspiring against the Ottoman Empire. He actually is the one who set up the biggest Jewish spy network during World War I in the lands that the Ottoman Empire controlled.
Yeah, but that only happened after the Balfour Declaration, where it was kind of offered, where kind of the services were organized by the Zionist movement. They offered it to British, that we can give you a lot of help. But actually, ironically speaking, the British actually thought that they would back the kind of Jewish request, because they thought, like most, unfortunately, the common trope was they thought that, well, maybe we need America to help join the World War One. Maybe the Jews in America who are in the media can help influence Americans to join the war, which is a trope of the standard trope you see today of but they say that Nazis say that the Jews control the media and so on, which is a typical trope you hear, that is meant to be anti-Semitic, right? An anti-Semitic trope, right? But the British Empire actually thought that was the case and wanted to use that to get America to join the Allies in winning World War One, and they were looking to use any kind of help they could get to do that, which is probably why many historians think that's what the British believed, which is why they backed the movement, Zionist movement. But the reason why I mentioned this and the reason why I'm going there in the first place was simply because
we kind of went off on a tangent.
we went off on a tangent. But it was very relevant.
Yes.
Which is what I saw was that you got a situation where the majority of Jews in the world thought it was pie in the sky to resurrect a 2,000-year-old, 2,000 dead. So it's a 2,000 years old. It had been dead state, right? Even then they didn't resurrect this, a state based on Mosaic law. They just made a secular liberal state and called it Israel. But it was dead for 2,000 years. It's a political entity they thought that controlled by Jews. They thought, what, you're going to resurrect that? That's ridiculous. Yeah, not going to happen. And slowly, by gathering a movement and simply just changing people's perspective on it, where he undid the roadblocks in people's minds, right? And then more and more kind of Jews from around the world joined the Congress, and it started to get more and more and more momentum, even though they didn't know at that point how they're going to achieve it. They actually didn't have, they didn't know, because they couldn't invade the Ottomans. They weren't a state, they weren't an army. How are they going to do this? They went to the German Kaiser. They thought maybe he would pressure the Ottomans, because they were allies, pressure the Ottomans to maybe accept a deal. They were thinking, we don't know what to do, but they were still building farms and agricultural settlements in Palestine under the Ottomans. A lot of it not with the Ottomans not knowing what was happening, but they were just thought, look, some Jews said, look, I don't care about state. Let's just get Jews back to Palestine because it's their homeland, even if they don't have a state. It's not, we don't care, but as long as they can just go back there. So there was different opinions amongst them, right? Other Jews were called cultural Zionists. They were ones who said, look, we don't care about political state so much. We just want the Jewish identity, especially in Western countries, to be preserved because they're Jews are kind of, in a way, being dissolved of their culture, becoming westernized, becoming like liberalized and losing the knowledge of their language and things like this. So there was so many different madahib or factions or what have you. And you just simply see that there's the political Zionists, the ones who actually wanted to have a state, start to win as they gather more and more momentum. They have these congresses where they update on the latest successes, usually failures that they encountered, but it just created this directed focus. Even then, the majority of the world's Jews didn't think anything would come of it. They didn't support it, and religious Jews said, no, only until the Messiah comes. Then you'll have a state. The vast majority of religious Jews didn't believe that the state of Israel could ever be established, and they thought it shouldn't be established until the Messiah comes. That was the prophecy they believed, right? And only until 1967, then they changed their minds. That's after Israel's established and after the 6-Day War. The reason why I brought all this was when the Quran says that Allah does not change the state of a people until they change what is within themselves. It's a general statement. It doesn't only apply to believers. It's like it applies to anyone. That if they change what they believe and how they view things, their situation changes. And so even though this caused a great oppression against the Palestinians, right, and it caused they're suffering to this day, which I've been arguing, for their rights, and I've been arguing against what's been happening to them. But I noted how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed this situation to occur because these people, many Jews around the world who adopted the political Zionism, they simply believed it was possible and could be done, and then somehow it happened simply because they changed their perspective on it. From a pie in the sky dream to something practical. How would they ever have achieved it if they didn't get any backing by any particular power? Because how are they ever going to, before you have a state, how can you you can't invade, and you don't have any armies, right?
Yeah.
So my point is this: if political Zionists could resurrect a state that had been dead for 2,000 years with no starting armies and not much unity amongst them, by the way, then why can't Muslims resurrect a state that's only been gone for 100 years and we already have states and armies? That was my point. And as I said, everyone thinks, oh, but the Jews were united. No, they weren't. They were not. They were very much not united at all. The same.
No, it's true. There was with the Zionist Council, a lot of Jews living in minority or like in other countries. They didn't want to have that impression that their allegiance is to the state over like the Zionist state over, like there's going to be conflict of interest, right? Like because they thought, okay, if we're going to be in the United States, we don't want people to think that we have an allegiance for this over this homeland that has accepted us, right? So there was a lot of conflict. It wasn't like a straightforward thing that everyone was on board, but you did have some people voraciously like working towards, trying to establish, right, this project, right, the Zionist project. But you're absolutely correct in that sense. I think also one thing that so then we can kind of break it down also in a practical sense. When you're talking about, changing that condition within yourself, right? And I see this with a lot of Muslims today, because I've been involved in da'wah for over 22 years, and meeting scholars, du'at, people, volunteers, imams, so many things. And people always talk brotherhood, they talk unity, even people talk khilafah. But inside, it's like they don't really have that care for one another. Because I think you have to, like, if you don't want khilafah as the idea, this would be really good because the pragmatic conclusion or outcome of that is we're going to be strong and we'll have this one, united, front. Like they only look at it from that one type of lens. But for that to happen, you have to have like at least a sincere care. You care about your deen. You care about your love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You care about Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You care about one another, right? But many of these kind of the rhetoric that Muslims say, they don't have the care to back it up, whether it's for the cause or for the people. You know what I mean? And if we look at the sunnah of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he truly cared for people, even though he fought battles, even though he sent people, but there was a sincere care, because as soon as there was an opening to forgive or to practice mercy, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did that, right? But I find that even if you see the rhetoric, like the way that we deal with each other, the rhetoric is there. Oh, unity, brotherhood, all these things, but there's not real care and kindness. You know what I mean? And it's often, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, the quality of the believers, adillatil al-mu'mineen, like they should be kind, to the believers. That's one of the qualities and characteristics, right? So, I think part of that internal change to see it externally is that when we say, hey, we want to, for example, if a person says, hey, I want to bring back the, khilafah, or I want to bring back this unity or whatever, we have to actually sincerely care about people, right? Because you've probably seen it more so than I have, because you're kind of in, the debate world, or you see it even on social media, but we're very quick to kind of raise the sword with each other and bring each other down. We disagree, and it just goes from 0 to 60 in a second, right? Yeah. And it's like, how many of us are practicing some of those basic practical things that are just, because in my estimation is that if you have true iman and you understand iman, you have the understanding, and you adhere to the truth, a natural consequence of that is that those people should be uniting together for the khilafah. That's like a natural, byproduct of people who are having these, this internal processes going on, right? So if you have these internal processes, we shouldn't say, okay, you know what, today is the day where if you haven't called somebody, you should call them and see how they're doing. You know what I mean? Go to you heard your brother's sick, go visit your brother who's sick. Sahih Muslim. This is like one of the rights that we have on each other. Give an invitation, receive, giving sincere advice to one another. But a lot of those practices are far and few between, right? Like even with people like Muslims, people are quote unquote friends with each other, they don't even have a lot of these fundamental practices, but it should be just a natural consequence of that care, of that belief. You know what I mean? So at that level, do you see, what trend do you see? Do you see that people are getting to that level of consciousness, or are we still kind of far away even from that? You know what I mean?
Well, I feel that if you just change the concepts in the Muslim minds, the rest follows, because
that's exactly right. Like it should just be, like it should flow, right? Like iman. Like if a person has true iman, like for example, there's somebody that I gave da'wah to, he accepted Islam. His first visit to the masjid, I took him to the masjid. He sees a donation box. The first thing he says, "Can I donate?" No one told him you should donate, or there's like sadaqah in Islam or whatever. He's new Muslim. He just told him La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. But a natural consequence of iman is like, I want to give. Like, you know what I mean? So I think that's the problem, is that that major fundamental part of truly understanding that concept is maybe only partially in place, right? It's not fully constructed.
Well, an analysis of the current Jahiliyyah, the Muslim world, has usually been restricted to people say, the way to revive Muslims is that we do certain actions, or the way to the reason why we're backwards is because we don't do certain actions. And yes, that is the case, but to an extent. But it's more like if you're not doing actions that are required, there's something. These are effects that you're not seeing, which means the cause of these effects are not there. And if you're seeing the cause of bad effects that shouldn't be there, that means there's a cause that's there that shouldn't be there. So when we see actions, we're just seeing effects. We have to look behind the effects to see what's the cause of it. So when you see Muslims engaging into arguments, drama, not forgiving each other, and what have you, you have to ask, well, is it just they're just hot-tempered, it's just these people? No. Why would they engage in that? It's simply because if the average Muslim, at least in the Muslim world anyway, speaking, when the Muslim world doesn't live by any higher values anymore, like it used, centuries past. So what you get is much like you get in areas where, let's say, law and order has broken down in any country, where gangs take over. Now, in gangs, if you're doing a business deal and the other person's not paying you for your product or whatever it is, you can't go to the police and say, "Excuse me, I gave this person 5 kilograms of cocaine, and they haven't honored the deal by paying me back money." The police will arrest you with them, right? So, what guarantees that people honor their word to you is your reputation, right? You have to have a reputation, otherwise they won't respect you, because you can't go to any third-party authority. But if that's the case, then if your reputation is your currency, then you need to do whatever you can to buy reputation, so to speak, which means that if people disrespect you, you have to retaliate against them by showing them the consequences of disrespect. If another gang is getting more reputation than you, and they might take your future business, you need to fight against them, outdo them, compete against them, and see them lose in order for you to win. It becomes zero-sum game.
Yeah.
So I've often looked at the Jahiliyyah in the Muslim world I often liken or translate the word Jahiliyyah, even though it means ignorance, but I translate it to actual anarchy. Because people think, well, anarchy just means no government. Well, yes, but there never can be no government amongst humans, because humans always order themselves. Always, where they form gangs, they form local community, neighborhood watch associations. They form it automatically. It's an emergent property amongst humans. Anarchy is when any society or group of people don't live by any higher principle except human ranking. Right? Then, if that's the mindset, then Islam in Muslim society becomes viewed as simply a source of ranking, right? So that, someone is righteous or religious, okay, we respect him if he shows that. And then others will say, that person's just righteous and religious because they want to show off, because they just want to get the kudos, to get the respect. And so then people are cynical, and they're cynical about when they do see righteous people. But at the same time, then people use religion saying, I'm a better scholar than this guy, or that scholar's a charlatan. Listen to me. You have scholars having drama with each other. That has occurred or does occur. Or their followers saying, this scholar's my scholar, I'm following better than your scholar. And you have, your scholar's off the manhaj. No, your scholar's off the manhaj. And that translates up for every activity that Muslims do would be competition, one-upmanship, because there's no higher value. They forgot the higher value. Simply telling them, brothers, what you're doing is haram, we should all be brothers in the deen, that's viewed as what do they say, being a pietistic ideal. It's really great. You're very naive. It's really great sentiment, but you're naive, because how things work on the ground is, eat or be eaten.
Yeah, kill or be killed, right?
Yeah, so it's great, that's utopic what you're believing. Whereas what it should be is actually, it should be practical. Where people say, well, look, we're here to worship fi sabilillah. Every Muslim success is every other Muslim success, because we're all advancing the same thing. We're raising the levels of our. So if one business in an area, in a community area, gets very successful, it shouldn't be the cause of other rivals to try to destroy them. But that success might bring more money into that area, and then the other businesses.
All ships rise with the tide.
Exactly, but because Muslims don't have that concept in the Muslim world. It's one about undermining your fellows, and not about let's all be in the same boat together and raise ourselves up. There was an experiment done, a clinical experiment done, in looking at human psychology, where I've got the kind of game that was happening, but people had a choice to bet on some activity and get a little bit of money. But if they were seeing one of their fellow participants making more money than them, they could spend their money to make them lose their money. Right? And what they found is that people were more willing.
Is that prisoner's dilemma?
No. But that's similar.
Okay.
But people were willing to actually spend their money out of envy to make people lose their own money to their colleagues, even though it wouldn't affect, what's it got to do with you? If you kept spending your money to maybe make more money, even though on smaller increments, maybe you'd still come out of that experiment with some money, as opposed to saying, but I hate that person getting more than me, and so on. So
when you became Muslim, because you accepted Islam in your early teens, right? Did you find what you observed in the Muslim community, was it to a degree of fitna for you? Because did that, because for some new Muslims, sometimes they come with these ideals of what Islam should be, and then when they get a crash course in reality of how things work, on the ground. How was it for you in your early days in Islam? Like your experience with the Muslim community?
Mixed. I met some good brothers. I met some bad brothers, and then I met some brothers that were in a local college, and they were actually really amazing. They had a really amazing. They created a really amazing scene. He actually gave me almost a taste of what a Muslim society could be like.
Yeah.
If the principles were followed, the ideas were implemented, but if Muslim mindset was simply changed. I made a lot of abstract points, so I'm gonna maybe give you something more concrete just to show you the difference. So, if let's take the Dawah scene or Dawah generally. So, and again, I'm not talking about anyone in particular. I'm just giving you. I'm calling to things that people have seen.
You're not gonna name names.
No, I'm going back from 20 years of experience. I can pick any example from my 20 years. Nothing recent at all. So, for example, some brothers I knew were doing dawah as a hobby, and then when it starts to get you people coming to your website, when they were writing blogs and they're writing articles, that was how it started before YouTube. Then people were starting to say, "Oh, okay, this is actually I'm getting a regular readership." And then Speaker's Corner before the cameras came, so before YouTube came, Speaker's Corner had some liveliness, but there were brothers that had reputations, and what I saw was that when one's reputation of one particular brother was rising, and someone else maybe had to share their audience, because some people will come to the corner, some will go to that one, some will go to that one. There would be some envy, rivalry. They would start actually attacking other brother by saying, "Oh, this person's a deviant," or "This person doesn't know what they're talking about. This person's ignorant," and it would lead to some dramas between them, because you think, well, that person's success is my loss. That's the concept in the mind, right? That caused that behavior. Yeah. Whereas the better concept, if they that would have made a different behavior, and I've seen that this also with brothers, is if they see someone doing well, they say, "Alhamdulillah, the Deen of Islam is being advanced successfully," which is all our success. With Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because our purpose here is to advance it. And if I am envious at one brother's really astute arguments or his persuasiveness or what have you, I'm going to try to improve my arguments. I'm going to friendly compete in a way that mutually encourages. Okay, I'm going to compete with that brother by improving myself. Compete in the good, right, as the Quran says. Compete in the good, and not compete by undermining, but say, okay, you've raised your game. I'm gonna, alhamdulillah, mashallah, excellent. I'm gonna raise my game, in the mutual good. You see. And and even if someone says they want more followers or they want what have you, they would see that person doing well, and they'll say, "You know what? I'm going to improve my arguments, improve my approach to get more followers to me." And ultimately, the level of quality of dawah goes up. So even those who are doing it cynically, right, for cynical reasons, would still, where they had that mentality, it would still have a positive effect on the dawah, because instead of undermining that person, they'd be seen as just improving themselves to compete. So simply having a change of concept creates different behaviors, right? And if some brothers used to ask me, it's like years and years ago, maybe a decade ago, when there was various dramas and things occurring, and they said, maybe you should wade in, maybe you should, speak, speak about it. And I said, no, because if you wade in, it won't be understood as, you're giving good nasiha. It'll be understood as, you're now trying to undermine. You're now a new player has entered the game to try and undermine, because and this would probably be an advice I have for people today, is that you can't simply just change that concept in people's minds simply by wading in and arguing with the people in public, because it gets interpreted as, oh, you're now attacking me because you're envious or you're whatever.
I think they project their intention on other people.
Oh no, of course, because when someone has that concept, an incorrect concept in their mind, they can only understand their mental model of other people will be based on what they think motivates, is motivating everybody else.
Yeah.
No, of course. Whereas
no honor amongst thieves, right?
well, yeah. But if they just said, look, if they just changed the concept and said, look, you could say, look, in the da'wah, if you see your fellow brother in deen doing successful, say alhamdulillah, and just up your own game.
That's why the scholars, they talk about envy is actually also a problem with your aqidah, because you think that the khair of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is limited, and that we're all fighting over these limited resources, but you don't know what khair. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's khair is not limited to what your mind says, right? Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide you whatever goodness or barakah and whatever you do, irregardless of another person's success, right? So it's also actually, I think, was fundamental again to those core issues, because it's an aqidah issue. If you feel are you putting yourself now restricted on the khair that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given? So it's only, 10, say for example, followers, they just make it a simple number. It says, oh, we're fighting over 10. No. You know what I mean? Who knows what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in your mind, you cannot, because you don't know the ghaib. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the unseen and what's written for everyone, and you've made a certain limited amount that we're fighting over. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
I use an expression in one of the articles. It's better to be a fish that shares an ocean than a swan that rules a swamp. But I changed it, maybe, and I said maybe a toad that rules a swamp, because the swan looks nice, but the toad, like it toads, well, at least I have this swamp belongs to me, but it's a swamp. Yeah. Whereas a fish might be one fish in the sea, but if you get to share the whole sea, there's plenty of space, and it's better, it's nicer, rather than a swamp. So, but my point is this: if Muslims change their concepts about this, the behavior would change. You see, so if they change what's within themselves, their situation would change. And subhanAllah, in the UK, for example, there's a lot of friendly cooperation, help between Muslim organizations, between different du'at.
That's good.
They've matured. Everyone's matured across the board. It's really nice to see. I mean, I can't speak for other countries because I don't have that much understanding of what's happening, outside the UK scene so much. You can't use YouTube to judge stuff. But
I hope it goes even beyond that. Like I think a metric of success should be more than just us not always at each other's throats, but actually actively collaborating with each other, utilizing each other's resources and skill sets, for a common unified purpose. And also, I think
stronger.
And then also, like I said, that real care. You know what I mean? Because one thing I'll tell you from my experience in the dawah, people who are actually actively working the dawah, they have very weak support structures. Unfortunately, they should have much stronger support structures.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean. We don't care about our shuyukh, we don't care about our leaders, our du'at. Like they're kind of almost on their own. Like some people, they deal with whether they're dealing with health issues, family problems, whatever. Sometimes they're by themselves. No one, they give, but no one ever really gives back to them. You know what I mean? Like, hey, how are you doing? You okay? At least just to say a salam. Are you alive? How's your health? What's going on with you? You know what I mean? Even I would say to that level, we should start thinking like, the more we could even at an emotional level just reinforce, you actually bring strength to the dawah, because that individual you're calling to, maybe they needed that salam, that hug, that attention, and that makes them a stronger and better da'i. You know what I mean? So I think even on that fundamental level, because for sure, anytime you give, you get more in return. Anytime you give, and that could be a salam, that could be a phone call, that could be, a visit. You know what I mean? So I think on that fundamental level, I hope we kind of actually raise our standards. So it's like, oh, it's good. We haven't had any major beefs in a while, but hopefully it can get even to a better level, where we can actually, start getting to some of these lofty ideas that we've been discussing.
Well, as I said, like if you just simply show Muslims that. So look, all these different, let's say, just using an example of the dawah scene as an example, just an example to show the concept. So if you just simply say, look, we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. So if we all kind of help each other, you cancel out the weaknesses and you actually reinforce the strengths. So that if we were just a bunch of individuals, we reach only this amount. There's I think there's like a meme or something where, so if everyone is standing, you have everyone standing beside a wall and the wall's taller than them.
Yes.
Or no matter how many individuals you get, they wouldn't be able to cross over the wall.
Yeah.
But if they actually start like going on top of each other and pushing each other up and helping each other up, they could actually all go over the wall, with the person that goes over the penultimate person putting their hand down and pulling up the last person.
Yeah.
They could all go over the wall.
Yeah.
See, so that's just an analogy, but if Muslims in the dawah scene, in globally, wherever dawah scene there is in different countries, if they adopted this, then what you'll find is that our dawah would be impeccable, as the weaknesses are negated by people giving nasiha, by people saying, brother, let me help you, here's some better arguments, let me help you, here's how you should say things in a better style. And at the same time, saying, kind of strengthening each other, because, many times I've seen many du'at, they might not be clued up in certain subjects, but there's another da'i who is.
100%,
and he says, here's my notes, here's something, use it. So this is the kind of stuff, that's just an example. But the point was this, that in the Muslim world, generally speaking, if the understanding was that if we all help each other, we become stronger. And if you have tawakkul min Allah, right? Allah will always, He will not abandon us, and He will actually, bring that strength together. He will actually aid that strength. If you help someone not expecting anything in return, because it has to start by that initiating point. Like, okay, I'm going to help you. I don't expect anything in return, and then Allah will not disappoint you, right? Because getting people to say, look, just help someone, don't expect anything in return. Well, they're not going to do anything back to me. Why should I start? But once you get the ball rolling, it creates like a snowball effect where people actually start to get, they get more trust that is now the new way of doing things. And then even those who are not so religiously minded will then change their behavior as the culture changes.
No, you're right about that chain reaction, because my wife recently went through a drive-through like a coffee house, and she came to the window and the person said, "Oh, the person in front of you already paid." And she's like, "Oh, really?" He's like, "Yeah, like a few car links ago, somebody started that, and it's just been continuing." So my wife's like, "Yeah, I'll pay for the next person, right?" And the next person had a way smaller order than her. She had the kids in the car, right? but who knows how long it lasted, right? It just started by one person probably said, "I'm going to do something nice," and then the other person said, "Hey, I should do something nice," and you know what I mean? And it just perpetuated, right? So on that note, sweet words from a very sweet man.
Where?
And we could have gone all night. Actually, I didn't think we'd go this long because it's so late. You're tired, but when you get the conversation going and we're talking about a lot of different heavy topics and subjects and things like that, it becomes very engaging. And then, your tiredness kind of goes away because your mind is being stimulated in all sorts of different ways. So
yeah, well, we're both very, we've been in the Dawah for some time. We're very passionate about these subjects, but it's mainly because, as I said, we both see, despite all the failings we might see amongst Ummah today, we see the great potential that can be achieved by them.
Yes, yeah.
And
Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's a blessing because He doesn't put that in everybody's heart, in their minds. Not everybody has that. People get jaded, whether they're born Muslim or they revert to Islam. I've seen it. It's only select people. It's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses that person to have that feeling, and it's a mercy. It's a mercy because I feel those people are the ones that are truly alive.
Inshallah, may we be worthy of that, if that is indeed the case. But I think I'm heartened to see actually so many Muslims actually that see the potential, not just a few. And I want to see if Muslims really believed in themselves as Allah believes in them, because He does not give us a burden greater than we can bear. So if we are given these tests, it's because Allah knows we can pass these tests.
Yes.
So if we believed in ourselves as Allah believes in us, that we can do it, then we would overcome this. We would overcome it very easily, in fact. And that's the tragedy is that that some Muslims is taking some time for them to realize, and as the longer it takes, the more we have to unnecessarily suffer as an ummah until we actually reach that point where there'll be a time where maybe our grandkids or even inshallah our kids would look back and say, well, why did Muslims not unite sooner? Like what was happening? Why didn't they just not? It's so obvious, and you'd be like, you think that, right? But But anyway, khair, inshallah. All we can do is like just try our best, and may Allah give success to His deen and to the ummah, and inshallah accept our good deeds and grant us all mercy and enter us all into Jannah Firdaus, inshallah.
Ameen. It's a pleasure to do this in person. We had to do this online during COVID. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us, it was a mercy actually, COVID, because we never had really online activities and presence, but COVID forced us to do that. But now we got to do this IRL, and I think IRL is more powerful. So in real life, we were able to get together, alhamdulillah. So it's a pleasure as always. And if you want to, do you know our tagline? Maybe you can do our tagline to take us out. I'll say it, and then if you can remember it, maybe you could be the first speaker, because I say it to the others, and then they always have a problem getting through the whole tagline outro. So it's we live by the haqq, we die by the haqq, and just when you think life is stuck, tune into Life Haqq. Do you think you can?
We live by the haqq, we die by the haqq. Just when you think life is stuck, tune into Life Haqq.
That's right.
Okay, got it.
Allahu Akbar.
Almost.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Do I feel that the New York police are providing enough protection, or do I have to have protection of my own? I look for protection from Allah.